Imagine it's 2019. You're David, a 53-year-old project manager living in suburban Phoenix. You've done everything right. You graduated college, got a stable job, contributed to your 401k for 26 years, paid off your car, refinanced your mortgage twice to get better rates. You check your retirement account on a Tuesday evening, and the number reads $487,000. You feel a small wave of relief. You're on track. Maybe not wealthy, but comfortable, safe. You close the laptop and go to bed believing you've beaten the system. What David doesn't understand is that at this exact moment, at least 15 separate mechanisms are quietly extracting wealth from his life. Not dramatically, not through a crash or a scandal, but slowly, invisibly, legally, by design. By the time David retires in 2031, he will discover that his $487,000 has less purchasing power than his father's pension did in 1986. He will not understand why. He will blame himself. He will never realize that the system was designed to produce this exact outcome. This script is not about financial advice. This is an autopsy. An autopsy of 15 quiet mechanisms that systematically transfer wealth from people like David to institutions, governments, and financial intermediaries. None of them require fraud. None of them require conspiracy. They simply require you not to notice. This isn't theory. It's documented history. And once you understand how these mechanisms work together, you'll see why most people never build lasting wealth. Most people, when they think about threats to their wealth, imagine dramatic events. A stock market crash, a layoff, a medical bankruptcy. These are visible enemies. They make headlines. But here's what history teaches us. The majority of wealth destruction doesn't happen in a single catastrophic moment. It happens through mechanisms so mundane they don't even feel like losses. In 1971, the average American worker earned about $7,500 per year. If that worker had saved 10% annually and invested it in a simple index fund, they would have watched their nominal account balance grow substantially. On paper, they would look wealthier. But if you adjust for inflation, fees, taxes, and the changing cost of essential goods, that worker's real purchasing power grew far less than the numbers suggest. The nominal number went up, the actual wealth didn't. This is the first principle of quiet wealth destruction. The mechanisms that erode your wealth are designed to be invisible inside rising nominal numbers. You see the account balance grow. You don't see what's being taken. Mechanism 1. Inflation as a silent tax. The first and most universal destroyer of wealth is inflation. Not hyperinflation. That's visible and rare. We're talking about ordinary, persistent 2 to 4% annual inflation. The kind central banks target as policy. When governments spend more than they collect in taxes, they have three options: cut spending, raise taxes, or print money. The first two are politically painful. The third is politically invisible. When the money supply expands faster than economic output, each unit of currency purchases slightly less than before. This functions as a tax on anyone holding cash or fixed income assets. But unlike a formal tax, it requires no legislation. No vote, it simply happens. In 1971, a gallon of milk cost about $1.18. By 2023, that same gallon cost $4.21. The milk didn't change, the dollar did. Over those 52 years, the dollar lost approximately 72% of its purchasing power. If you held $100,000 in a savings account in 1971, that money would be worth roughly $28,000 in real terms today. You didn't spend it. You didn't lose it. It was extracted from you by policy decisions made in Washington. Throughout history, every fiat currency system has eventually inflated away the savings of its middle class. The Roman denarius, the German paper mark, the Argentine peso, the mechanism is always the same. Mechanism 2. Financial product fees. The second mechanism is fees, particularly the fees embedded in financial products that most people never fully understand. The 401k plan was introduced in 1978 as a supplement to traditional pensions. Today, over 60 million Americans rely on these plans as their primary retirement vehicle. What most participants don't realize is that these accounts contain layers of fees: fund expense ratios, administrative fees, record-keeping fees, investment advisory fees. Some are disclosed in prospectuses nobody reads. Some are buried in basis points that sound trivially small. Here's the math. If you invest $10,000 per year for 30 years and earn 7% annually, you'll end up with approximately $944,000 before fees. Apply a total fee load of 2% annually, common in many employer plans, and your final balance drops to roughly $661,000. That's $283,000 extracted from your future. 2% per year sounds small. Compounded over decades, it transfers nearly 30% of your wealth to intermediaries. A study by the Department of Labor found that nearly half of 401k participants didn't know they were paying fees at all. They thought the account was free. This is how wealth is quietly extracted, not through theft, through structure. Mechanism 3. Tax drag on investments. The third mechanism is taxation, specifically the way taxes interact with investments over time. Consider two investors. Both invest $100,000 and earn 8% annually for 30 years. The first investor pays taxes on gains each year. The second investor defers all taxes until the end. After 30 years, the first investor ends up with approximately $574,000 after taxes. The second investor ends up with approximately $761,000. Same investment, same returns. A difference of $187,000 purely from the timing of tax payments. This is called tax drag. It's the compounding cost of paying taxes along the way rather than deferring them. What makes this mechanism quiet is that you never see the money you didn't make. You see the returns you got, you pay the taxes, but you don't see the alternate future where compounding worked uninterrupted. Governments understand this math intimately. That's why they tax along the way whenever possible. Mechanism 4, lifestyle inflation. The fourth mechanism is behavioral. It's called lifestyle inflation, the tendency for spending to rise in lockstep with income. A 25-year-old earns $45,000 per year and spends $40,000. Their savings rate is roughly 11%. 5 years later, they earn $70,000. But now they have a better apartment, a newer car. They spend $63,000. Their savings rate is now 10%. A decade later, they earn $120,000. But now there's a mortgage, private school tuition, vacations that match their success. They spend $110,000. Their savings rate is 8%, lower than when they were 25. Income tripled. Savings rate declined. Wealth accumulation stagnated. This isn't stupidity. It's human psychology interacting with a consumer economy designed to capture every marginal dollar of income. A 2020 study by the Federal Reserve found that nearly 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense with cash, even among households earning over $100,000 annually. Income is not wealth. Spending determines wealth. Mechanism 5. Housing as consumption, not investment. The fifth mechanism involves the single largest purchase most people ever make, their home. For decades, home ownership has been sold as the cornerstone of American wealth building. Buy a house, build equity, retire rich. But let's examine the actual numbers. According to data from Robert Shiller, the real return on residential real estate, adjusted for inflation, has averaged roughly 0% per year over the past century. Yes, nominal prices rise, but so do construction costs, maintenance, taxes, insurance, and interest payments. The average homeowner pays between 2 and 4% of their home's value annually in carrying costs. Over a 30-year mortgage, this amounts to 60 to 120% of the home's original value, paid in addition to the purchase price. Meanwhile, transaction costs of buying and selling a home consume roughly 10% of the sale price each time ownership changes hands. The house you live in is not an investment, it's consumption. It provides shelter and stability, but it quietly destroys wealth through carrying costs, illiquidity, and opportunity cost. The people who build wealth through real estate are not homeowners. They're landlords, people who hold property that generates income, not expenses. Mechanism 6, debt servicing costs. The sixth mechanism is debt, not the principal, but the interest. If you borrow $300,000 at 6% interest on a 30-year mortgage, your monthly payment is approximately $1,199. Over 30 years, you'll pay a total of $647,500, more than double the original loan amount. You will pay $347,500 in interest alone. Now imagine you had invested that $347,500 at 7% annual return over the same period. It would have grown to approximately $1.1 million. This is the wealth transfer hidden inside ordinary debt. Every dollar paid in interest is a dollar not compounded for your future. And because interest payments are front-loaded in amortization schedules, the extraction happens fastest in the early years, precisely when compounding would have been most powerful. Banks understand this math perfectly. That's why they offer 30-year terms instead of 15. Their profit comes from maximizing the duration of your debt, not minimizing it. Mechanism 7, currency devaluation. The seventh mechanism is related to inflation, but distinct, currency devaluation. Inflation measures the decline in purchasing power within a single economy. Currency devaluation measures the decline relative to other currencies and global goods. Since 1971, when the United States abandoned the gold standard, the dollar has lost roughly 85% of its value relative to gold. For most Americans who earn, spend, and save entirely in dollars, this feels abstract. But for anyone buying imported goods or traveling internationally, the impact is real. When the dollar weakens, oil prices rise, even if supply and demand haven't changed. This feeds through to gasoline, shipping, manufacturing, food prices, everything that depends on energy. Historically, every reserve currency eventually loses its status, and when it does, the holders of that currency pay the cost. The British pound was the world's reserve currency for over a century. Its decline from 1914 to 1970 erased roughly 70% of its purchasing power against gold. Mechanism 8. Behavioral errors. The eighth mechanism is behavioral, the predictable errors that human psychology makes when confronting financial decisions. Loss aversion causes people to sell winning investments too early and hold losing investments too long. Recency bias causes people to overweight recent events when predicting the future. Herd behavior causes people to buy when others are buying and sell when others are selling, the exact opposite of what maximizes returns. A landmark study by Dalbar Inc. found that over the 20-year period ending in 2019, the average equity investor earned 4.25% annually, while the S&P 500 returned 6.06% annually. That's a gap of 1.81% per year, entirely attributable to behavioral errors. Over 30 years, that gap translates to a 45% reduction in final wealth. The financial system does not correct for these errors. It exploits them. Panic selling creates buying opportunities for institutional investors. Euphoric buying inflates bubbles that insiders exit before they pop. Your psychology is a wealth transfer mechanism. Mechanism 9. Healthcare costs. The ninth mechanism is healthcare, not the cost of illness, but the structural economics of the American healthcare system. Medical costs are the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. A 2019 study found that 66% of bankruptcies were tied to medical issues. Between 2000 and 2023, the cost of employer-sponsored health insurance increased by 225%, more than 3 times the rate of general inflation. The average family now pays over $23,000 per year for coverage, split between premiums, deductibles, and out-of-pocket expenses. That $23,000 is wealth that no longer compounds. It's money that goes to insurers, hospital systems, pharmaceutical companies, not to your retirement account. And because healthcare costs rise faster than wages, the extraction accelerates over time. The healthcare system is structured to capture maximum revenue, not to optimize health outcomes. The wealth doesn't disappear, it transfers. Mechanism 10. Education debt. The 10th mechanism is education debt, specifically the structural trap built into American higher education financing. In 1980, the average cost of public university tuition was roughly $2,100 per year in today's dollars. By 2023, it exceeded $10,000 at most state schools and $55,000 at private institutions. When you guarantee loans to anyone who enrolls, regardless of program quality or employment outcomes, you create a system where schools can raise prices indefinitely. The debt burden shifts to graduates, while institutions capture the revenue risk-free. Today, total student loan debt in America exceeds $1.7 trillion. The average borrower owes roughly $37,000. A 22-year-old graduates with $37,000 in debt at 6% interest. Over the life of the loan, they pay approximately $56,000, $19,000 in interest alone. If that same person had invested that monthly payment at 7% return, they would accumulate roughly $97,000. And because student loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, the extraction is permanent. Mechanism 11. Insurance gaps and overinsurance. The 11th mechanism involves insurance, the mispricing and misallocation of protection. Consider whole life insurance. The average policy charges fees that consume 50% or more of first-year premiums. The internal rate of return rarely exceeds 2 to 3% annually. Meanwhile, term life insurance provides equivalent death benefit at 1/10 the cost. Yet whole life insurance remains a multi-billion-dollar industry. Why? Because agents earn commissions of 50 to 100% of first-year premiums. On the other side, many people are underinsured against disability, an event far more likely than premature death. Roughly 1 in 4 workers will experience a disability lasting more than 90 days before retirement. Yet only 35% carry adequate coverage. The gap costs wealth both ways, overpaying for coverage you don't need and losing income to events you're not protected against. Mechanism 12. Opportunity cost blindness. The 12th mechanism is invisible by definition, opportunity cost. The wealth you don't accumulate because your capital is locked in suboptimal uses. If you spend $50,000 on a new car, you're not just spending $50,000. You're spending the $200,000 that $50,000 could have become over 25 years at 7% return. But human psychology doesn't naturally compute opportunity costs. We see the thing we're buying. We don't see the future we're sacrificing. A person who spends $300,000 on vehicles over 30 years, upgrading every 5 years, sacrifices over $1.2 million in opportunity cost. The person who drives reliable used cars, spending $60,000 over the same period, and invests the difference, accumulates that $1 million. Same income, different outcomes. Mechanism. 13. Estate and inheritance taxation. The 13th mechanism is estate taxation, the extraction that occurs at generational transfer. In the United States, estates exceeding the exemption threshold are taxed at rates up to 40%. The exemption is scheduled to sunset in 2026, dropping to roughly $6 million. State-level estate taxes in places like Massachusetts and New York kick in at thresholds as low as $1 million. But the larger wealth transfer is not the tax itself. It's the inefficiency of generational transfers that lack planning. Probate costs, legal fees, family disputes. These frictions consume an estimated 3 to 8% of estates. Wealth that compounds over generations creates dynastic advantage. Wealth that is extracted at each generation starts over. Most families, even affluent ones, die without adequate plans. Mechanism. 14. Pension system failures. The 14th mechanism is pension system failure, the gradual erosion of defined benefit retirement promises. Private pensions have been replaced by 401k plans, which shift all investment risk to employees. Public pensions, which still cover teachers, police, and government workers, are increasingly underfunded. The total unfunded liability exceeds $4 trillion by some estimates. When pension funds are underfunded, there are only 3 options: reduce benefits, increase contributions, or default. The common response is to defer, to make optimistic return assumptions, skip contributions, and push the crisis to the next generation. The people who pay are those who worked for decades expecting a promise that will be diluted or broken. If you are counting on a pension for retirement, you are trusting that political entities will make good on promises they have systematically underfunded for decades. Mechanism. 15. Financial advisor conflicts of interest. The 15th mechanism hides inside a relationship of trust, the conflict of interest embedded in financial advisory services. Most Americans assume that someone called a financial advisor is legally obligated to act in their best interest. This is incorrect. The majority of financial advisors operated under a suitability standard, meaning they only had to recommend products suitable for your situation, not necessarily the best available. This allowed advisors to steer clients toward products that paid higher commissions. Even under newer fiduciary rules, enforcement is limited and carve-outs are extensive. A study by the Department of Labor estimated that conflicted advice costs American investors roughly $17 billion per year, not through fraud, through structural bias. The wealth transfer is quiet. The advisor seems helpful, the client feels advised, but the cumulative impact compounds over decades. Here's what makes these 15 mechanisms devastating. They don't operate in isolation, they compound. Inflation erodes your savings. Fees extract from your investments. Taxes drag on your returns. Lifestyle inflation consumes your raises. Housing costs masquerade as wealth building. Debt service extracts interest. Behavioral errors sabotage your timing. Healthcare costs accelerate. Education debt delays accumulation. Opportunity costs go unnoticed. If you earn 7% annually and lose 3% to fees, taxes, and inflation, your real return is 4%. If you then lose another 2% to behavioral errors and opportunity costs, your real return is 2%. At 7%, $10,000 becomes $150,000 over 40 years. At 2%, $10,000 becomes $22,000. That's the gap these mechanisms create. Not through drama, through quiet, persistent structural extraction. Why doesn't someone fix this? The beneficiaries of these mechanisms have more political and economic power than the victims. The financial industry spends billions annually on lobbying. Healthcare companies are among the largest political donors. Each mechanism has constituencies that profit from its existence. Meanwhile, the victims, ordinary savers and workers, are diffuse and largely unaware that they are being extracted from. They assume their outcomes are the result of personal choices, not structural forces. The system is not designed to be reformed. It's designed to continue. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You cannot escape all 15 mechanisms. Some are embedded in the structure of modern economies. Inflation will exist as long as fiat currencies exist. Taxes will exist as long as governments exist. But you can reduce your exposure. You can understand which mechanisms are extracting from you and by how much. You can restructure your finances to minimize fees, defer taxes, avoid debt, resist lifestyle inflation, and recognize behavioral errors before they cost you. The people who build lasting wealth are not those with the highest incomes. They're those who lose the least to these mechanisms. That's the constraint. You cannot beat the system, but you can learn to lose less to it than others do. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial or investment advice. Individual situations vary. Anyone making financial decisions should consult qualified professionals who understand their specific context. Return to David in Phoenix 2019, checking his retirement balance, feeling secure, unaware of the 15 mechanisms quietly working against him. By 2024, David will watch inflation erode his purchasing power while fees continue to extract from his 401k. He'll upgrade his car, pay medical bills, and make behavioral errors during market volatility. He'll never calculate the opportunity costs. He'll trust an advisor with undisclosed conflicts. He'll assume his struggles are personal failures. And none of it will appear on any statement he receives. That's the design. Most wealth destruction doesn't announce itself. It compounds in silence, hidden inside structures that appear neutral or even helpful. The people who benefit from your unawareness have no incentive to educate you. The pattern is already in motion. The question is not whether these mechanisms are extracting your wealth. They are. The question is whether you'll see them clearly enough to minimize what they take. The system runs on your inattention. This channel exists to document these patterns before they finish their work. Understanding what's quietly destroying wealth is the first step to preserving what remains. Most people will never see these patterns until it's too late. You don't have to be most people.